Every qualitative researcher receives the exact same directive from their advisors and textbooks: analyze the data and then write it up. This directive rests on a specific assumption that the data you collected already exists in its final state, and your words are a neutral vehicle used to transport those findings to the reader. This chart shows the standard pipeline: literature review, methodology, data collection, coding, and finally, writing up. The goal at this final stage is purely objectivist. You must strip away personal subjectivity to project credibility and validity. But this structural model relies on a logical fallacy. The physical act of writing is never an innocent or neutral endeavor. Treating prose as a mere reporting tool misrepresents the research and limits what a scholar can discover. The origins of this detached academic voice are historical. Scholar Linda Tuhiwai-Smith outlines this mechanism in her critique of decolonizing methodologies. Smith argues this detached academic tone reinforces colonial practices. Words like we and us act as defaults that center Western institutions. These conventions build a prose structure that alienates marginalized scholars, strictly dictating who is the authority and who is the subject. As a result, standard qualitative methods were built out of narratives told about indigenous and marginalized populations, rather than constructed alongside them. Qualitative research does not end when the writing begins. The research occurs within the writing itself. This highlights the concept of onto-epistemology, the intertwined nature of being and knowing. The page is the site where this reality is constructed. To decolonize qualitative inquiry, researchers must abandon the illusion of an innocent text and rethink the physical mechanics of how they write. Accessing new forms of knowledge requires dismantling the traditional qualitative pipeline. Scholar Elizabeth St. Pierre describes a different model, framing writing as a field of play. Here, the research, the theory, the living, and the thinking happen simultaneously, rather than in a strict sequence. By stepping away from rigid, propositional prose, researchers generate types of data that a standard methodology would filter out. The modality of the writing dictates the nature of the data that emerges. Entering this field of play requires a willingness to subvert institutional expectations of what a research paper should look like. The first dimension of this shift involves temporality, specifically pushing back against the academic pressure for constant productivity. This graph illustrates how traditional writing enforces a frantic, aggressive rhythm of inquiry, designed purely to maximize rapid academic dissemination. In contrast, the concept of slow ontology replaces the demand for immediate output with localized, embedded rhythms of inquiry. This involves active techniques like intentional pausing, incorporating sketchbooks, and using physical choreography as sites of creative intervention. The physical act of not writing, stepping away from the keyboard entirely, generates the space for novel theoretical connections to form. A methodology restricted to high-speed transcription misses the embodied, slow-moving data that this temporal shift captures. The second dimension focuses on dismantling the illusion of the solitary, objective observer. Standard qualitative formatting isolates the researcher. It positions them on a pedestal, granting hierarchical authority over both the text and the subjects they observe. Practitioners exploring new ways of knowing counter this dynamic through collaborative entanglement. Writing alongside others physically and relationally entangles the researchers. The process changes both the individuals involved and the direction of the inquiry itself. This redistribution of authority aligns with Michel Foucault's observations on disciplinary power. Refusing to use imposed, institutionalized formatting is an act of unraveling academic control. It rejects the dictated workflows of the university apparatus. Some collectives push this further by creating an authorless hexaity, assembling published texts from reviewer notes, poems, and conversations, removing a central dictating voice. Removing the singular author figure is an epistemological redistribution of power within the research process itself. The third dimension addresses sensorial ecology and the strict limitations of propositional prose. Relying strictly on black ink arranged on a white page limits the spectrum of human experience a researcher can communicate. Scholars have developed techniques like sonic writing to solve this. Instead of merely describing a sound, the writing attempts to capture the acoustic and more than sensory materialities of the environment. Others integrate painting and poetry directly into the research to document pre-verbal realities that standard academic vocabulary fails to articulate. Pushing beyond linguistic boundaries requires a research creation mindset, where art and science operate as indistinguishable tools of inquiry. If you limit your output to words, you confine your qualitative data to the linguistic domain. Expanding the modality of the text reflects the messy, sensorial ecology of lived experiences. When we examine these methodologies together, they suggest a different trajectory for qualitative inquiry. Writing acts as a volatile agent in the research process itself. Theoretical framing, field notes, and personal vulnerability do not exist in their final form prior to the draft. They coalesce and synthesize through the physical act of writing. Critics will argue that experimental writing sacrifices legibility and clarity, but this muddling of legibility serves a purpose. It preserves the serendipity and inherent complexity of real-world phenomena. There is no singular way to execute qualitative research, precisely because there is no singular way to write it. To move qualitative research into its next evolutionary stage, scholars must be willing to write beyond the propositional. Continuing to rely on the textbook method of writing up keeps qualitative inquiry trapped in a representationalist model. You must examine your own default writing practices and the epistemological assumptions hiding within them. The next time you sit down with a dataset, recognize that you are not merely reporting on a reality that has already passed. You are actively constructing its onto-epistemology in real time. So ask yourself, what is your writing constructing?